No, Ivan quietly replied, I won't write any more poetry. The investigator smiled politely, allowed himself to express his certainty that, while the poet was presently in a state of some depression, it would soon pass. No, Ivan responded, looking not at the investigator but into the distance, at the fading sky. It will never pass. The poems I used to write were bad poems, and now I understand it. The investigator left Ivanushka, having obtained some quite important material. Following the thread of events from the end to the beginning, they finally succeeded in reaching the source from which all the events had come. The investigator had no doubt that these events began with the murder at the patriarch's ponds. Of course, neither Ivanushka nor this checkered one had pushed the unfortunate chairman of Masalit under the tramcar. Physically, so to speak, no one had contributed to his failing under the wheels. But the investigator was convinced that Berlioz had thrown himself under the tramcar, or tumbled under it, while hypnotized. Yes, there was already a lot of material, and it was known who had to be caught and where. But the thing was that it proved in no way possible to catch anyone. We must repeat, there undoubtedly was someone in the thrice cursed apartment number 50. Occasionally the apartment answered telephone calls, now in a rattling, now in a nasal voice. Occasionally one of its windows was opened. What's more, the sounds of a gramophone came from it. And yet each time it was visited, decidedly no one was found there. And it had already been visited more than once and at different times of day. And not only that, but they had gone through it with a net, checking every corner. The apartment had long been under suspicion. Guards were placed not just at the way to the courtyard through the gates, but at the back entrance as well. Not only that, but guards were placed on the roof by the chimneys. Yes, apartment number 50 was acting up, and it was impossible to do anything about it. So the thing dragged on until midnight on Friday, when Baron Magel, dressed in evening clothes and patent leather shoes, solemnly proceeded into apartment number 50 in the quality of a guest. One could hear the Baron being led into the apartment. Exactly 10 minutes later, without any ringing of bells, the apartment was visited, yet not only were the hosts not found in it, but, which was something quite bizarre, no signs of Baron Magel were found in it either. And so, as was said, the thing dragged on in this fashion until dawn on Saturday. Here new and very interesting data were added. A 6-place passenger plane, coming from the Crimea, landed at the Moscow airport. Among the other passengers, one strange passenger got out of it. This was a young citizen, wildly overgrown with stubble, unwashed for 3 days, with inflamed and frightened eyes, carrying no luggage and dressed somewhat whimsically. The citizen was wearing a tall sheepskin hat, a Georgian felt cape over a nightshirt, and new, just purchased, blue leather bedroom slippers. As soon as he separated from the ladder by which they descended from the plane, he was approached. This citizen had been expected, and in a little while the unforgettable director of the Variety, Stepan Bogdanovich Likodayev, was standing before the investigators. He threw in some new data. It now became clear that Woland had penetrated the Variety in the guise of an artiste, having hypnotized Styopa Likodayev, and had then contrived to fling this same Styopa out of Moscow and God knows how many miles away. The material was thus augmented, yet that did not make things easier, but perhaps even a bit harder, because it was becoming obvious that to lay hold of a person who could perform such stunts as the one of which Stepan Bogdanovich had been the victim would not be so easy. Incidentally, Likodayev, at his own request, was confined in a secure cell, and next before the investigators stood Varanyuka, just arrested in his own apartment, to which he had returned after a blank disappearance of almost 2 days. Despite the promise he had given Azazello not to lie any more, the administrator began precisely with a lie. Though, by the way, he cannot be judged very harshly for it. Azazello had forbidden him to lie and be rude on the telephone, but in the present case the administrator spoke without the assistance of this apparatus. His eyes wandering, Ivan Savlyevich declared that on Thursday afternoon he had got drunk in his office at the Variety, all by himself, after which he went somewhere, but where he did not remember, drank Starka somewhere, but where he did not remember, lay about somewhere under a fence, but where he again did not remember. Only after the administrator was told that with his behavior, stupid and senseless, he was hindering the investigation of an important case and would of course have to answer for it, did Varanyuka burst into sobs and whisper in a trembling voice, looking around him, that he had lied solely out of fear, apprehensive of the revenge of Wolin's gang, into whose hands he had already fallen, and that he begged, implored and yearned to be locked up in a bulletproof cell. "Pah, the devil. Really, them and their bulletproof cells," grumbled one of the investigators. "They've been badly frightened by those scoundrels," said the investigator who had visited Ivanushka. "They calmed Varanyuka down the best they could, said they would protect him without any cell, and here it was learned that he had not drunk any starka under offense, and that he had been beaten by two, one red-haired and with a fang, the other fat." "Ah, resembling a cat?" "Yes, yes, yes," whispered the administrator, sinking with fear and looking around him every second, coming out with further details of how he had existed for some 2 days in apartment number 50 in the quality of a tip-off vampire, who had all but caused the death of the fine director Rimsky. Just then Rimsky, brought on the Leningrad train, was being let in. However, this mentally disturbed, gray-haired old man, trembling with fear, in whom it was very difficult to recognize the former fine director, would not tell the truth for anything, and proved to be very stubborn in this respect. Rimsky insisted that he had not seen any Hella in his office window at night, nor any Varanyuka, but had simply felt bad and in a state of unconsciousness had left for Leningrad. Needless to say, the ailing fine director concluded his testimony with a request that he be confined to a bulletproof cell. Anushka was arrested just as she made an attempt to hand a $10 bill to the cashier of a department store on the Arbat. Anushka's story about people flying out the window of the house on Sadovaya and about the little horseshoe which Anushka, in her own words, had picked up in order to present it to the police, was listened to attentively. "The horseshoe was really made of gold and diamonds?" Anushka was asked. "As if I don't know diamonds," replied Anushka. "But he gave you 10-ruble bills, you say?" "As if I don't know 10-ruble bills," replied Anushka. "Well, and when did they turn into dollars?" "I don't know anything about any dollars, I never saw any dollars." Anushka replied shrilly. "I'm in my rights." I got recompensed, I was buying cloth with it, and she went off into some balderdash about not being answerable for the house management that allowed unclean powers onto the 5th floor, making life unbearable. Here the investigator waved at Anushka with his pen, because everyone was properly sick of her, and wrote a pass for her to get out on a green slip of paper, after which, to everyone's pleasure, Anushka disappeared from the building. Then there followed one after another a whole series of people, Nikolai Ivanovich among them, just arrested owing solely to the foolishness of his jealous wife, who towards morning had informed the police that her husband had vanished. Nikolai Ivanovich did not surprise the investigators very much when he laid on the table the clownish certificate of his having spent the time at Satan's ball.